Hello and welcome to another edition of Mr. Walker's Apes. Today's going to be a very overview-ish lecture of ecosystems. The reason for this is I just want to refresh your memory on all the different things that are involved with ecosystems. There's a lot going on. I'm not going to go in depth on a lot of these things because I expect that you got it in biology. If there's anything in this PowerPoint lecture that you see that you are not comfortable with, that you are not familiar with, ask about it in class or do some research on the internet. That's the beauty of having these things online, is the instant that you don't recognize something, hit pause, open up a new tab or window, go to Google, type in the word that you don't understand, and I'm sure it'll bring you right to a Wikipedia page or some other website that will be more than helpful to you. Alright, so the objectives for this lecture. We need to learn about the energy conversions that underlie ecological processes. Energy is the driving factor for almost everything in life. Without energy, you die. Okay? Without energy, anything dies. And then, of course, the Earth is one interconnected system that provides natural capital that we can use for all sorts of stuff. Okay? So what are some different forms of energy? Energy is simply defined as the capacity to do work. Well, what the heck does that mean? It's pretty abstract. Sounds like a physicist wrote that, which they did. So, what are some different forms of energy? Well, right, you've got where does almost all energy on Earth come from? It's the big bright thing up in the sky, the sun. Well, the sun provides a heck of a lot of energy for the Earth. Okay, so it's traveling through space. It hits the Earth. It hits the plant leaf. It goes into the plant, where the chloroplasts do photosynthesis, and then it creates sugar, which we eat, and we get the energy out of the sugar, and then we die, and and so it's this great big cycle of energy, and everything needs it. So different forms of energy. Well, the main two forms that you've probably possibly heard about, are potential and kinetic. Okay, a ball at the top of the hill has potential energy, meaning it has the potential to do work, and as soon as you push it down the hill, it now has kinetic energy, which is it's actually doing work. Those sorts of things. Gasoline, oil in the ground has potential energy, and as soon as you burn it in your car, it has kinetic energy. Everything needs energy. So, not all energy is the same, though. Okay, so we have energy quality, which is how useful is the energy. Lots of energy is low quality energy, but there are some high quality energies out there. High quality energies are generally concentrated and can perform much more work, such as electricity, chemical energy, concentrated sunlight. So if you take a bunch of mirrors and you concentrate that sunlight on a single solar panel, it'll give you a lot more energy than if you just let it spread about the Earth and kind of disperse, as I see there in the low quality energy. Okay, if you disperse the energy, it cannot do quite as much work. So heat is a very low quality energy. It can do stuff. Heat can eventually boil water, but it takes a heck of a lot of time to do it. So, it's not the best. Generally, you go from high quality energy to low quality energy as you change it through its forms. So if you have an electric stove, that high quality electricity is transformed into a low quality energy known as heat, which is used to boil water, which then can turn to steam, which can do other stuff, like create electricity. So, it takes a lot more electricity to create electricity than you get out of it. That's kind of where we're going with this, is all energy eventually dissipates and is pretty bad. Which leads us right into these laws of thermodynamics. You will need to know these throughout the course. I'm introducing them now. We will reintroduce them when we get to energy. We will reintroduce them before we do the AP exam. Thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics, energy is neither created nor destroyed. It is only converted from one to another. In other words, all the energy in the universe is here. Nothing will create more energy. So, must be transferred. Well, okay. So the sun is not creating energy, it's just using the energy that it already has in the atoms and it's converting that into a light and heat energy, which is then transferred to Earth, where it is transferred into a plant, where it is converted once again back to a chemical energy, which is then put into the human body, which is transformed into different types of chemical energies, and finally comes back out as heat again. Generally energy is transferred through, all sorts of ways, but, electrical energy is transferred through a power line, and all sorts of stuff. Second law of thermodynamics, when energy is changed from one form to another, some of the useful energy is degraded, so we always go from high quality to low quality, is what the second law of thermodynamics states. For example, if we take a fossil fuel, which is high quality energy like coal, and we burn it in a coal power plant, all right, we're converting from a high quality energy coal to a low quality energy heat. So we've transferred some energy. Then we're going to go from heat energy to mechanical energy, because we're going to turn a turbine. Then we're going from mechanical energy to electrical energy, which is, the turbine turns to produce electricity, which is sent down the power line, which goes into your stove, which then transforms back into heat, and so on. So it takes a lot of coal to produce a lot of electricity, which takes a lot of electricity to produce a small amount of heat. Goes on and on and on. So, what about matter? Well, we're not energy beings like you might see on Star Trek or something, so we are made of matter. Matter also has the same sort of law where it cannot be created or destroyed, only converted from one form to another. So let's relate this to environmental science. When I say that there is no away, what does that mean? Okay, if I say that Earth is a spaceship, what does that mean? Okay, how does that impact pollution? How does that impact matter cycling? Like water cycle. Water is matter. So think about those things. Start trying to relate these notes to the class. And these will be discussions we have in class. So the biology overview, this is, again, super brief. Hopefully you got most of the stuff in biology. Okay, an organism is any form of life. Cells make up organisms. Organisms can be eukaryotic or prokaryotic. Organisms can be classified as species, which can then be, and they all have that whole kingdom, phylum, order sort of thing going for them, and then you get to species. Okay, organisms can reproduce either by asexual or sexual reproduction. Humans are sexual. We must have two separate organisms combine gametes. Asexual, those can be a lot of things, including bacteria, of course, are the most common. They just split apart by binary fission. So, organisms that reproduce sexually are classified as members of the same species if they can actually or potentially breed. So, what does that mean? Actually or potentially? Well, actually would be simple. Okay, your parents actually bred. Okay, as gross as that is to think about, they actually did it. Potentially, well, they could have potentially bred with somebody in China. So we are all part of the human species, but they didn't. So, that's the way that works. And that's the same thing with any other sort of species. A squirrel from one state could potentially breed with a squirrel from another state, so they are part of the same species. Well, if they cannot potentially breed, like if there's a giant ocean in the way, then those squirrels won't count. So a squirrel from China will not potentially breed with a squirrel from the United States because they don't have airplanes. They must be able to produce live, fertile offspring. Okay, so this is why horses and donkeys can breed to create mules, but they are still considered separate species because they do not produce fertile offspring. Mules are not fertile. So far, approximately 2 million species have been identified, not including bacteria. I think if we include bacteria, it jumps to about 7 million. But scientists estimate that there are as many as 14 million species on the planet. So there's a lot that has not yet been discovered. Population. So we go from species to population. A population is a group of the same species occupying the same area at the same time. The population of Chesapeake High School is approximately 2,000 humans. Population of Maryland, you can do whatever. You just have to say a specific area. All right, so the population of the United States, this is a number you should keep in your head. The population of the United States is approximately 330 million people. Population of China is approximately 1.1 billion people. Okay, so you see I'm specifying an area. The population of the Earth for humans is approximately 7 billion people. All right. So I'm talking about one species in one area in all of those examples. We could talk about, the population of monarch butterflies, like you see in this picture. The population of monarch butterflies in Maryland is whatever. But you must specify the species and you must specify the area, because that's the definition of a population. Genetic diversity. Well, species can have genetic diversity. Obviously, not all humans look or behave alike. So populations can change in size, age distribution, density, and genetic composition. Depending on natural selection, the genetic composition may change gradually or quickly. All right. If a disease hits and wipes out all the people who are not immune to the disease, then your genetic composition changes to where everyone is immune to the disease overnight, almost. Overnight in terms of, the time span of the Earth. And then of course they change in size. Again, if a disease hits, population is probably going to decline. If you have a giant food influx, the population will increase dramatically, especially in animals, maybe not so much in humans. In the age distribution, old die, young live, or young could die, old could live, depending on what influences are going on, and of course density. If you fence in a yard, but the rabbits keep breeding, the density will increase. Alright, some more about ecosystems. Ecosystems are places where populations live. If you have multiple populations in an area, then you have a community. So within the national forest, you have a community of deer, squirrels, rabbits, fox, etc. Okay, they are all different populations living together in the same area, creating a community. And the ecosystem is where that community lives. It's the environment that they live in. Now you have to specify the ecosystem. We could be talking about a pond, a forest, a city. Okay, all those could be ecosystems. Introduction to Earth's atmosphere. We will come back to this a lot when we do air pollution and climate. But I do want to introduce you to this. Up to now, you may have just thought of the atmosphere as it's this giant cloud of air around the entire Earth. Well, yes, okay, but it has names, and there are different things that happen at different levels. All right. The troposphere is what we live in. The trees live in the troposphere. TR and TR, trees, troposphere. Okay. It is the inner layer, goes up about 11 miles, so no airplanes do not leave the troposphere. They stay in the troposphere because they only fly at 32,000 feet, which is about 6 miles. Okay. Clouds, weather, all those sorts of things happen within the troposphere. The stratosphere is above the troposphere. It goes about 30 miles out and contains the ozone layer. Very important. After that is the mesosphere, thermosphere, and not shown way out here is the exosphere. Space shuttles go anywhere between the thermosphere and exosphere. If you leave the atmosphere, so you go out to the moon, you go to Mars, then you're no longer in the atmosphere. But that's a long, long way out. We also have other things. Other spheres. We have the hydrosphere, lithosphere, and biosphere. Okay, hydrosphere, that's water. Hydro, water. Okay, this is all the water on the Earth. Whether it's underground, on the surface, frozen, in the air, whatever. It's all the water on the Earth. The lithosphere, litho means rock, so this is all the rocks on the Earth. Everything from the inner core all the way up to the Earth's crust is the lithosphere, and that has its own cycles and things. We have to recycle minerals and such. Those are done through volcanic activity primarily. The biosphere, this is the living stuff. Okay, from the lower atmosphere to the upper lithosphere and lower hydrosphere. So in other words, bottom of the ocean to the clouds. That's your biosphere. That's where stuff lives. As far as we know, stuff does not live in the core or the mantle, and it does not live out in space. So, here you go. Here's your Earth cut up. Okay, if we take a slice out of it, you've got inner core, outer core, mantle, crust, and atmosphere. And the mantle actually has two different pieces. We'll get to that when we get to the lithosphere stuff and talking about rocks and how they all are created. And there's, if we just cut the Earth in half, same deal. Okay, inner core, outer core, mantle, crust, atmosphere. Things that are necessary for life: energy and matter. Without both of these, life will not exist. Energy, as we've already said, goes from high quality to low quality energy. As an example, sun to plants, to heat the air or water, to heat to space. All right. We're always going from high quality to low quality. And then matter is your vitamins, which are nutrients, minerals, nutrients. These are all cycled. Okay, you take in a vitamin A, you later urinate, vitamin A goes out. Okay, you just take what you need, the rest goes out. Some things, calcium, all right, it's in your bones. It's a mineral. That won't be recycled until you die, hopefully. All right, so the rules of the sun, again, going really fast because I think a lot of this stuff is obvious. It warms the Earth. Okay, 99% of the light that hits or 99% of the heat of the Earth comes from the sun. Okay, the other 1% comes from the inner workings of the Earth. It's obviously a reactant for photosynthesis. Light plus carbon dioxide creates sugar. Okay, power cycling of matter. What do I mean by that? Well, if you want to recycle matter, then you have to have the sun. It creates the energy for the decomposers. It creates the energy needed for lots of stuff. Okay, and obviously it is the driving factor for climate and weather systems. All right, if the sun did not exist, global warming would not be possible. The greenhouse effect would not be possible. We would not be here. There would not be enough energy for life to exist on Earth. All right, so solar radiation. Maybe you've seen this before, maybe you haven't. You're going to see this one a lot as we get to, especially into global climate change and why it happens. Okay, so 100% of the light and heat leaves the sun. Of that 100% that hits Earth, about 25% is diffused and scattered and hits the Earth's surface. About 25% is direct. So this is why, when you go outside, you can even see things in shadows. It's not completely dark, and that's because some of the light is scattered and still makes it under the tree, even though most of it, the direct, is blocked. 4% is reflected by the land and sea surfaces, especially ice. 20% is absorbed by the atmosphere and clouds. Well, that's a lot of heat being absorbed by the atmosphere. What if we increase that number to 21%, 22%, 23%? What happens? 20% is reflected by clouds. White things reflect light. Simple enough. Clouds are white. And then the atmosphere itself will scatter and reflect about 6%. So a total of about 30% is reflected back out into space, and the rest stays here on Earth, about 70%. So parts of the ecosystem. All right. Climate controls what type of life will be found where. Biomes. This should not be a new word to you. Biomes are large terrestrial regions characterized by climate. Okay, these are where things will live. There are aquatic life zones as well. These are kind of the equivalent of biomes, but they are for the water. So you've got different layers of the ocean, and there are different layers where things will live. So if you need light to survive, you're not going to be at the bottom of the ocean. And ecotones. These are transitions from one ecosystem to another. Okay. shoreline of a river. You're transitioning from an aquatic zone to some type of other ecosystem, a forest ecosystem. Here's a graph. Take a second, look at it, see how it interprets. Okay, so on the y-axis we've got annual temperature, and on the x-axis rainfall, precipitation. So if we increase rainfall and we increase temperature, notice that the temperature is really cold up here and really hot down here, then we're going to get in the tropicals. You're going to be a tropical rainforest. Lots of rain, high temperature. If we don't have very much rain and it's cold, then we get our tundra. Okay, somewhere in the middle, temperate forest. This is like where we live. Grassland, less rain. Savanna, hot, but even less rain. Desert, very little rain. All temperature ranges. Okay, so we'll get there. You can have very cold deserts. Deserts mainly classified by how much rain it gets. So what kinds of conditions determine the distinctions? Well, you just saw. Definitely the rain available and the temperature, but also at altitude, okay, how high up is it, and latitude, how close or far away from the equator is it, and nutrient mineral availability and food availability. What types of things are able to live there and why? So parts of the ecosystem, you've got biotic and abiotic. Biotic, the living stuff. Abiotic, non-living stuff. So some abiotic factors, there's a range of tolerance. Okay, there's only so much sunlight, water, chemicals that a biotic factor can tolerate in order to live there. So, and one abiotic factor would be salt. Okay, a freshwater fish cannot live in salt water because it does not tolerate the abiotic factor of salt, as an example. Further components, okay, you've got producers and consumers. Producers are autotrophs. These are the things that produce the stuff for everything else. They make their food by photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. Hope this is not new to you. Okay, we're going to talk about these. We're actually going to do a lab starting off early in the year on gross primary productivity and net primary productivity. Gross primary productivity is how much total energy the producers produce. The net is how much is available for other organisms to use, because the plant itself must use some of the energy it produces. All right, that's why it makes sugar. Plants make sugar for themselves. It just so happens that they make extra, and animals utilize that. Further continuing with our components of the ecosystem, after producers or autotrophs, you have herbivores, carnivores. Okay, so herbivores are going to eat the plants. Carnivores will eat the herbivores, typically. There are omnivores. They can eat plants or animals. Scavengers, those eat the dead stuff. Detrivores eat dead stuff. And decomposers eat dead stuff. Okay, so scavengers look for recently dead things usually. Detrivores are going to generally eat dead leaves and dead trees, things of that sort. And decomposers will eat dead animals. Usually these are the bacteria and the fungus. Whereas scavengers are things like vultures. So respiration, all organisms must get their energy through respiration. Okay. Even plants do respiration. They have to use their own sugar. They just produce their own food. Humans do not produce their own food, so we have to eat something to get it. Generally, okay, you've got sugar, C6H12O6, combining with oxygen that you breathe in to produce CO2, water, and energy. All right, cellular respiration right here. Some decomposers rely on anaerobic, which means that they don't use the oxygen. Okay, they do fermentation. So I'm sure you learned about those things in biology. You've got photosynthesis, cellular respiration, and anaerobic respiration, which uses fermentation. So you cut out the Krebs cycle. Biodiversity. Biodiversity. It's a renewable resource. Yes, it is a resource. Why do I say biodiversity is a resource? Well, if you do not have a biodiverse area, then you cannot use the resource generally. It will go away. So biodiversity, we're going to do a lab with this. It's called a Shannon-Weiner Index. And what you're doing is you're trying to find out how many different species of things live in an area, and is that area biodiverse or not. Biodiversity, okay, diversity, how many different things are there, and bio, how many different types of living things are there in an area. So types of biodiversity. There's genetic, there's species, ecological, and functional. Genetic diversity. How many different genes are in an area? Okay. Species. How many different species are in an area? Ecological. How many different communities are in an area? And finally, functional. How many different biological and chemical processes are going on in an area? In this class, we're primarily going to be looking at species variety. It's much harder to look at things like functional, ecological, and genetic when you're in high school, because we can't be testing animals for their genetics, and we cannot be looking at super large areas. Also, functional is just generally hard to track. It doesn't matter if you have the tools available to you or not. It'll take years of study to figure out the functional diversity. So as a quick review of an ecosystem, you must have energy coming in, generally from the sun. Some of that energy is lost. Okay. Must have plants, must have animals. All these things are coming in, all these things are going out. Plants come in, seeds are dispersed, animals migrate in. We've got erosion and deposition, especially the wind brings in a lot of soil to areas. Within an ecosystem, you have plants, consumers, and decomposers, which work together. And then, of course, heat is lost through different things. Plants leave through dispersal. Animals migrate away. And, of course, just the same way that you bring soil in, you can lose soil out. So that's your ecosystem. It's kind of just this intertwined system of plants, animals living together with energy and matter. All right, something that you may have forgotten about, trophic levels. This is just where do things eat. So you've got your producers, those are your plants, then your primary consumers, which are herbivores and omnivores, secondary consumers, which are carnivores and omnivores, and then tertiary consumers, or third level consumers, things that eat animals. In other words, if I eat a fish, if I eat tuna, I'm acting as a third level consumer, because the tuna ate a sardine, which ate some plankton, which ate some, you can see the whole food chain there. So speaking of food chains, here's a food chain. Producers produce food, which are eaten by consumers, which are going to die, eaten by decomposers, which then produce inorganic nutrients, which the producers use, and you can see the cycle here. So here's a food chain. It just tells you what will be eaten by the next thing. As you can see at each step, some heat is lost, some energy is lost. Okay. So, for example, if as a human I eat only, one steak every week, I'm not going to survive. I have to eat many steaks in a week because the energy lost. A food web just is interconnected food chains. So, it's unlikely that cows get eaten by one thing. Cows do not just get eaten by people. Cows get eaten by decomposers. Cows get eaten by wolves. Cows get eaten by lions. Okay, so you've got to have this food chain. Now, keep in mind that a food chain is only going to be representative of what lives in an area. Okay, this is not going to be worldwide. So, if I have a cow in Canada, it's not going to be eaten by a lion. Okay, it might be eaten by a cougar, but not a lion. But if I have a cow in Africa, then it will be eaten by a lion. If I have a cow in Asia, it might be eaten by a tiger. So, it's of an area. You're not just creating this whole global food chain that, includes every known species. It's just not going to happen because certain things do not live in certain areas. So biomass. Biomass is the weight of all organisms, mass of all the biology. As you can see, in the ocean, phytoplankton make up the most of the biomass because you have to have lots and lots and lots of phytoplankton to feed all the zooplankton, to feed all the shrimp, to feed the fish, to feed the shark. So generally producers make up most of the biomass on the planet just because there has to be a lot of it in order to support a small amount of tertiary consumers. And finally, we have an energy pyramid. Okay, this is an energy pyramid in a way. It's three-dimensional. This one is attempting to be three-dimensional. It's not the best. But you have to have producers at the bottom of your pyramid. What happens when you flip a pyramid over? Well, it falls over. You cannot have carnivores at the top or at the bottom. Carnivores have to be at the top because they have to eat the most because of the second law of thermodynamics. So we'll do some activities in class revolving around this and see how well you guys can survive. All right. So I hope you learned something. I also hope that most of this was review. If you have a question about something, please ask. I know I flew through this. I know that you probably didn't get all of it written down or into your brain. So please take the time to review it. Please take the time to ask questions. So until next time, bye-bye.